Chapter 12. Arms. To fight piracy, to protect property, the content industry has launched a war. Lobbying and lots of campaign contributions have now brought the government into this war. As with any war, this one will have both direct and collateral damage. As with any war of prohibition, these damages will be suffered most by our own people. My aim so far has been to describe the consequences of this war, in particular the consequences for free culture. But my aim now is to extend this description of consequences into an argument. Is this war justified? In my view, it is not. There is no good reason why this time, for the first time, the law should defend the old against the new, just when the powers of the property called intellectual property is at its greatest in our history. Yet common sense does not see it this way. Common sense is still on the side of the Cosbys and the content industry. The extreme claims of control in the name of property still resonate. The uncritical rejection of piracy still has play. There will be many consequences of continuing this war. I want to describe just three. All three might be said to be unintended. I'm quite confident the third is unintended. I'm less sure about the first two. The first two protect modern RCAs, but there is no Howard Armstrong in the wings to fight today's monopolists of culture, constraining creators. In the next 10 years, we will see an explosion of digital technologies. These technologies will enable almost anyone to capture and share content. Capturing and sharing content, of course, is what humans have done since the dawn of man. It is how we learn, it is how we communicate. But capturing and sharing through digital technology is different. The fidelity and power are different. You could send an email telling someone about a joke you saw on Comedy Central, or you could send the clip. You could write an essay about the inconsistencies in the arguments of the politician you most love to hate, or you could make a short film that puts statement against statement. You could write a poem to express your love, or you could weave together a string, a mashup of songs from your favorite artists in a collage and make it available on the net. This digital capturing and sharing is in part an extension of the capturing and sharing that has always been integral to our culture, and in part it is something new. It is continuous with Kodak, but it explodes the boundaries of Kodak-like technologies. The technology of digital capturing and sharing promises a world of extraordinarily diverse creativity that can be easily and broadly shared. And as that creativity is applied to democracy, it will enable a broad range of citizens to use technology to express and criticize and contribute to the culture all around. Technology has thus given us an opportunity to do something with culture that has only ever been possible for individuals in small groups, isolated from others. Think about an old man telling a story to a collection of neighbors in a small town. Now imagine that same storytelling extended across the globe. Yet, all this is possible only if the activity is presumptively legal. In the current regime of legal regulation, it is not. Forget file sharing for a moment. Think about your favorite amazing sites on the net. Websites that offer plot summaries from forgotten television shows. Sites that catalog cartoons from the 1960s. Sites that mix images and sound to criticize politicians or businesses. Sites that gather newspaper articles on remote topics of science or culture. There is a vast amount of creative work spread across the internet, but the law is currently crafted. As the law is currently crafted, this work is presumptively illegal. That presumption will increasingly chill creativity as the examples of extreme penalties for vague infringements continue to proliferate. It is impossible to get a clear sense of what's allowed and what's not, and at the same time, the penalties for crossing the line are astonishingly harsh. The 4 students who were threatened by the RIAA, Jesse Jordan of Chapter 3 was just one, were threatened with a $98 billion lawsuit for building search engines that permitted songs to be copied. Yet WorldCom, which defrauded investors of $11 billion, resulting in a loss to investors in market capitalization of over $200 billion, received a fine of a mere $750 million. And under legislation being pushed in Congress right now, a doctor who negligently removes the wrong leg in an operation would be liable for no more than $250,000 in damages for pain and suffering. Can common sense recognize the absurdity in a world where the maximum fine for downloading 2 songs off the internet is more than the fine for a doctor's negligently butchering a patient? The consequence of this legal uncertainty tied to these extremely high penalties is that an extraordinary amount of creativity will either never be exercised or never be exercised in the open. We drive this creative process underground by branding the modern-day Walt Disneys as pirates. We make it impossible for businesses to rely upon a public domain because the boundaries of the public domain are designed to be unclear. It never pays to do anything except pay for the right to create, and hence only those who can pay are allowed to create. As was the case in the Soviet Union, though for very different reasons, we will begin to see a world of underground art, not because the message is necessarily political or because the subject is controversial, but because the very act of creating the art is legally fraught. Already, exhibits of illegal art tour the United States. In what does their illegality consist? In the act of mixing the culture around us with an expression that is critical or reflective. Part of the reason for this fear of illegality has to do with the changing law. I described that change in detail in Chapter 10, but an even bigger part has to do with the increasing ease with which infractions can be tracked. As users of file-sharing systems discovered in 2002, it is a trivial matter for copyright owners to get courts to order Internet service providers to reveal who has what content. It is as if your cassette tape player transmitted a list of the songs that you played in the privacy of your home that anyone could tune into for whatever reason they chose. Never in our history has a painter had to worry about whether his painting infringed on somebody else's work, but the modern-day painter, using the tools of Photoshop, sharing content on the web, must worry all the time. Images are all around, but the only safe images to use in the act of creation are those purchased from Corbis or another image farm. And in purchasing, censoring happens. There is a free market in pencils. We needn't worry about its effect on creativity, but there is a highly regulated, monopolized market in cultural icons. The right to cultivate and transform them is not similarly free. Lawyers rarely see this because lawyers are rarely empirical. As I described in Chapter 7, in response to the story about documentary filmmaker John Else, I have been lectured again and again by lawyers who insist Else's use was fair use, and hence I'm wrong to say that the law regulates such a use. But fair use in America simply means the right to hire a lawyer to defend your right to create. And as lawyers love to forget, our system for defending rights, such as fair use, is astonishingly bad, in practically every context, but especially here. It costs too much, it delivers too slowly, and what it delivers often has little connection to the justice underlying the claim. The legal system may be tolerable for the very rich. For everyone else, it is an embarrassment to a tradition that prides itself on the rule of law. Judges and lawyers can tell themselves that fair use provides adequate breathing room between regulation by the law and the access the law should allow. But it is a measure of how out of touch our legal system has become that anyone actually believes this. The rule that publishers impose upon writers, the rules that film distributors impose upon filmmakers, the rules that newspapers impose upon journalists, these are the real laws governing creativity, and these rules have little relationship to the law with which judges comfort themselves. For in a world that threatens $150,000 for a single willful infringement of a copyright, and which demands tens of thousands of dollars to even defend against a copyright infringement claim, and which would never return to the wrongfully accused defendant anything of the costs she suffered to defend her right to speak, in that world, the astonishingly broad regulations that pass under the name copyright silence speech and creativity, and in that world, it takes a studied blindness for people to continue to believe they live in a culture that is free. As Jed Horowitz, the businessman behind Video Pipeline, said to me, quote, "We're losing creative opportunities right and left. Creative people are being forced not to express themselves. Thoughts are not being expressed. And while a lot of stuff may still be created, it still won't get distributed. Even if the stuff gets made, you're not going to get it distributed in the mainstream media unless you've got a little note from a lawyer saying this has been cleared. You're not even going to get it on PBS without that kind of permission. That's the point at which they control it." Constraining innovators. The story of the last section was a crunchy lefty story. Creativity quashed, artists who can't speak, yada yada yada. Maybe that doesn't get you going. Maybe you think there's enough weird art out there and enough expression that is critical of what seems to be just about everything. And if you think that, you may think there's little in this story to worry you. But there's an aspect of this story that is not lefty in any sense. Indeed, it is an aspect that could be written by the most extreme pro-market ideologue. And if you're one of these sorts, and a special one at that, 188 pages into a book like this, then you can see this other aspect by substituting free market every place I've spoken of free culture. The point is the same, even if the interests affecting culture are more fundamental. The charge I've been making about the regulation of culture is the same charge free marketers make about regulating markets. Everyone, of course, concedes that some regulation of markets is necessary. At a minimum, we need rules of property and contract and courts to enforce both. Likewise, in this culture debate, everyone concedes that at least some framework of copyright is also required. But both perspectives vehemently insist that just because some regulation is good, it doesn't follow that more regulation is better. And both perspectives are constantly attuned to the ways in which regulation simply enables the powerful industries of today to protect themselves against the competitors of tomorrow. This is the single most dramatic effect of the shift in regulatory strategy that I described in Chapter 10. The consequences of this massive threat of liability tied to the murky boundaries of copyright law is that innovators who want to innovate in this space can safely innovate only if they have the sign-off from last generation's dominant industries. That lesson has been taught through a series of cases that were designed and executed to teach venture capitalists a lesson. That lesson, what former Napster CEO Hank Berry calls a nuclear pill that has fallen over the valley, has been learned. Consider one example to make the point, a story whose beginning I told in The Future of Ideas, and which has progressed in a way that even I, pessimist extraordinaire, would never have predicted. In 1997, Michael Roberts launched a company called MP3.com. MP3.com was keen to remake the music business. Their goal was not just to facilitate new ways to get access to content. Their goal was also to facilitate new ways